Excellent. So, welcome to the latest in the channel-focused webinar series. And today we're going to be talking about incentives in challenging times. What do your partners really want? We've got some fabulous panelists for you today. But before I introduce you to those folks, just a couple of things. Maddie, if you want to move on to the next slide. A reminder, channel focus, the full agenda is up on the website. If you want to register or take a look, capture that QR code on the bottom right of the screen at the moment. It will be on the Women's Leadership Council will be on the 7th of November and channel focus itself on the 8th and 9th of November this year at the Sheraton Universal Hotel in California, which is linked to Universal Studios. So, as I say, capture that QR code. You'll be able to look at the full agenda, which is up on the website, ready for people to register. Maddie, next slide. So we've got a great tradition in these webinars that people get involved, they answer questions, they ask questions. So we would love to see your comments, your suggestions, things that you would like to hear from our fabulous panelists during the course of the webinar. So just click on that chat button, type a question, or just comment to other people who are part of the webinar and get involved. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our panelists. And our first panelist is Tricia Atchison. And Tricia is the VP of Global Partner and Americas Marketing at Equinix. She's an experienced global partner leader with over 20 years experience in partner programs, marketing, communications, and partner enablement. She's held a number of partner leadership roles at companies like Citrix, CA, Symantec, and Veritas. And she very recently joined Equinix to head up their global partners and America's marketing. So Tricia, tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do at Equinix.
Thanks, Rod. So it's great to be here with everybody. As Rod said, I'm only a couple months in. And I would say right now, what I'm probably most focused on is really getting my arms around our ecosystem and really how we reward them, right? So we'll get into this, I'm sure, in the panel, but there's a lot of different ways that you can incent and reward your partners. And so this ecosystem is a little bit different from, the one I came from. And so I think understanding your partners is really important. So I'm definitely in that learning curve right up in terms of working with the partners.
Fabulous. And our second panelist is Carlin Bentley, and she's the SVP of Client Partnerships at Ansira. She's got nearly 2 decades of experience working with leading brands and their channel partners. She's grown Ansira's technology client portfolio by over 4 times in the last 6 years. And she has a global team, and they are expanding not just in the US, but also in London and Sydney. She drives forward-thinking feature enhancements and program modernizations through strategic client partnerships, has worked with all sorts of companies like Dell, Red Hat, Citrix, Microsoft, Sage, NetApp, to name just a few. She's passionate about the culture and food scene of Chicago, living with her 2 girls and husband, Ben, but loves weekends away in Michigan. In fact, as we were getting ready for the webinar, she's off to Michigan after the webinar almost today. So, Carlin, tell us a little bit about Ansira.
So we are a global marketing and technology solutions company. We feel that we enable brands and their partners, dealers, franchisees, whatever the ecosystem is, to drive demand and create seamless experiences and grow revenue through marketing services and our proprietary technology platforms. We work obviously in the high tech space, as well as with a variety of other verticals. And we're supporting digital marketing and advertising, integrated loyalty, websites, channel partner marketing, which is why we're on the call today, as well as integrated loyalty. And then we're also, we believe we're services led. So we do have some proprietary technology, which is our nerve center, supporting things like brand protection and marketing intelligence, channel engagement. But really, I think what distinguishes us from some of our competitors is our global service team that you kind of mentioned, Rod, that extends, beyond the US. I really think that gives our clients an advantage in the marketplace. And like you said, I've been in this business for about 20 years. I've had a variety of roles in both channel operations and product development, as well as the role I have today, which is in a sales and client account management role as the SVP of Client Partnership. So really excited to be here and share the stage with my fellow panelists.
So our first panelist is Heather Margolis, and Heather is the SVP of Marketing at 360 Insights. Prior to joining 360, Heather founded Channel Maven, the strategic channel marketing, communications and sales agency, which was acquired by 360 in 2021. She's a recognized channel expert and keynote speaker to a variety of audiences about entrepreneurship, channel programs, channel marketing and channel sales. And she is proud to originally be from Boston, but now calls Boulder, Colorado, her home. So Heather, tell us a little bit about 360.
Absolutely. So 360 Insights is a channel incentive management and ecosystem management platform. We really focus on enabling partners and inside other industries, dealers and resellers and distributors to better motivate their sellers through all sorts of different types of incentives, including spiffs and MDF and rebates or cashback. And then our ecosystem management platform provides a hub for your channel to live, your infrastructure to live and draw data and make decisions in a more intelligent way. Channel Maven is still alive and well inside of 360 as well. So channel marketing too, and demand gen with partners.
Fabulous, Heather. Thank you very much. And our final panelist is Chris Shrope, and he's a high-tech evangelist at Model N. He's focused on the economics of high-tech manufacturing. He's really keen on revenue optimization and channel compliance, is a real enthusiast. And he tells me he is also a profit nerd. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about Model N.
Yeah, sure. So Model N, we're also a software and service provider for anyone who has a channel business, any type of sales or activities coming through the channel. And so what do we provide? So Model N provides robust end-to-end solutions that enable high-tech companies and larger industrial manufacturers to manage growth, but also achieve success within the channel. So this means, right, effectively controlling the financial implications and ensuring compliance across, a number of programs. These could be, incentives that range, they could be company-wide, rebates, individual, they could be MDFs as well, and facilitating the payments through that as well. So you can scale, automate incentive programs so that you can motivate partners across that customer lifecycle. Really, this all helps you. What we try to do is really help you gain accuracy and timely insights on what's happening with channel revenue, how do I optimize my programs, and how do I really strengthen that partner experience. And so this is also, you can all really achieve the measurable ROI and growth you're trying to through that line of business. So hopefully that's a quick blurb on what we do.
Fabulous. Thanks, Chris. So we're going to be talking about incentives in challenging times. What do your partners really want? Chris, I'm going to start with you. You've just walked into a new company. You've no doubt got a program in place at the moment. I'm sure you're very focused on what the partners actually want, not just what they're getting at the moment, what they really want. How are you trying to assess what your partners are really looking for and how to meet those needs within the company?
Yeah, so I mean, I always try to go back to, the customer, which in this case would be the partner. And I do think it's really important to understand their business. And what we have seen over the last several years is the partner business is evolving, right? And so we used to have very nice little neat categories, and we could put everybody in those categories, and then we're like, this works for them and this works for them. And that's changed a lot because those models or those partner types have kind of melded. Lots of partners do lots of different things depending on the customer or the deal or the solution. And so I think the first piece is to really understand your partner ecosystem and the different types of partners you have and what motivates them, because that in and of itself, right, will help you to be successful. I think the other piece you have to spend time on is really understanding your business and what you're trying to have your partners do and what they respond to. And it's very timely. I mentor somebody in a different organization, and I met with her yesterday, and she's in charge of the partner program, and she's looking at incentives, and she's trying to automate. She's like, holy moly, this stuff was run by spreadsheets. Like, who does that? Like, it's 2023. And I said to her, I said, are you changing your incentives because the company's asked you to save money? Because I do think a lot of people are kind of in that world right now. And she said, no. She said, we're trying to get them to do more. And I was like, that's a brilliant answer, right? Like, going back to what is it you are actually asking your partners to do and want to motivate them to do more of. So I think you have to look at both camps. But I do think having a strong understanding of what your partners are looking for is really important, because I'm sure throughout people's careers, they have launched stuff that they thought was a brilliant idea, and it kind of fell flat because they didn't take the time to socialize it with the partners and get that input back from their partners.
And Colin, if I can bring you in, you're looking to really understand what the partners are doing. Give some guidance to the people on the call. What sort of things should they be doing to really drill into their partner base and understand what it is they're looking for?
I think it's interesting what Trisha was saying, because in some cases we are seeing a reduction in the amount of funding, right, for channel incentives in general. But in some cases, they're getting the same amount of money, but they're converting the program. So they're looking at, instead of kind of offering it to so many partners where they historically used to kind of do that, is really focusing on those high touch partners, or those that really share and are aligned to the same goals and objectives that you have as an organization, right? So we're seeing that shift for holistically for maybe an MDF or an SDF type program, right? But we've also got some clients where they're choosing to kind of run, some pilot programs in parallel, right? So they're maybe keeping that standard SDF or MDF type program running, but maybe they're focusing on a couple, like 6 to 10 high touch partners within that MDF or SDF circle, right? And they're rolling out, more strategic initiatives that are planned for maybe a longer duration, right? So instead of focusing maybe on the quarter, they're looking at 6 to 12 months. And they're looking at, whether or not there are, very specific and drawn out outcomes that are relatable to that partner specifically, right? And then in addition to that, what are those milestones that they can throw out there during that time period, that they can pay those partners on, and that are reportable and verifiable, right, as it relates to outcomes, So, in that case, those are running in parallel. There might be some additional funding there that's being thrown at those types of incentives, or they might be, reducing some of that MDF or SDF spend that would normally go, expired, right, or something like that into that bucket. And the other interesting thing is, historically, these programs or these shifts or these kind of new types of programs would be starting at, the beginning of a fiscal or a calendar year, and nobody's waiting anymore. I mean, people are looking to roll these things out immediately, right? And really start to gauge and see if they can optimize and start kind of scaling some of these things more quickly, because they're what partners are asking for.
Heather, bringing you into this.
Yeah, if I can jump in there, I think Sorry, Rod, just super quick on Carlin's point. I think they're also changing because people are automating. So I used to run the incentives program at EqualLogic. We were not automated. We were on spreadsheets. And 3 weeks before the end of the quarter, we'd go, what should we do next quarter that's different? And we'd say, we don't have time. Let's just do the exact same thing. So once it's automated and flexible, then it's easier to change it on the fly.
And what are your clients looking for that's different from 12 months ago? The market has definitely changed.
Yeah.
What are the differences in terms of what the clients are looking for? And what are the differences in terms of what the partners are looking for?
Sure. So I'm going to go in reverse. The partners, if they are struggling financially at all, they're now making decisions based more on the financial aspect of things. So normally they would walk into a situation, they would talk to their customers and say, I have the exact right thing for you. And now they're saying, I have the exact right thing for you. But the thing that's like an A- instead of an A+, I make more money. That's how they're now making their decisions. So if you're priced almost identically to your competitors, but you have a stronger incentives program, they're going to sell your product instead of the competition because they know that they can make a little more money. And it used to be that if you do points-based incentives, then the partners are having a more emotional response to what they're getting. They're getting a mountain bike or they're getting a television and they're able to point to it and say, look what I got from Equinix because I am such a great seller of their solutions. Versus cash that used to go toward things like that are now going toward paying off the mortgage and paying down utilities or credit cards because they're struggling elsewhere. So you need to think about, do you want them having an emotional response tied to you? Do you want them maybe just for this quarter and the next while they're struggling somewhat economically? Do you want to help them with the day-to-day things? And then on the vendor side, we're seeing that the vendors are customizing those. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, what are you seeing at Model N? What are the key changes you've seen from, say, 12 months ago?
Yeah, no, sure. And I do just want to double back quickly that I do, you know, Heather's point on, you know, this is also aligned with Trisha's point, right? Being aligned with value, and if where the company is with their own personal financials will be a clear indicator on how well the relationship's going to work and whether or not this program is going to line up. So I just wanted to quickly say that, but I think, yeah, I agree with the points here, and I just, you know, not to add too much more to it, but I would say it's, you know, if it is a new program that you're running or a new partner that you're bringing on, there's some expectations just to remove all that friction. And I think if you can bake some of these things in, it'll really help. And they're really all around, right, that partner experience or the customer experience, as Trisha had mentioned, right? So, you know, making it easy for onboarding, easy to report and track to program success, right? So if it is a different, like Carlin was mentioning, if it's not just month over month or quarter over quarter, but in fact it's, you know, first half and then second half, and looking at longer time durations because you need to account for new program, new onboarding, new scale up. You're not going to see the same results that you would with others. So making it easy to onboard, easy to report, and it's somewhat seamless. Now, you know, there could be a focus, well, I can't do that with all of my partners, right? I got them in the thousands. Well, I can only do that type of service, you know, high touch and high, you know, I guess, well orchestrated partner experience for my top 20 accounts. What do I do with the top, you know, the remaining 80? You know, I think that can be an area that is an issue for some customers and many of you out there, certainly those in high tech with, you know, those in the thousands in their channel ecosystem. And if there's a way that you can figure out ways to use RPA, if you can use in-application guidance, or if you can use maybe even a solution provider to bring active partner management to really help just lift and help just manage that, you know, long tail, if you will. So just partner experience really in general to help remove friction and really drive towards the ROI with the programs intended to build on. So.
Fabulous. We've got some great questions coming in, and I am going to pick up on those in just a moment. But Trisha, there's one thing I wanted to pick up with you first, because you're in the hot seat. You have a big bucket of money. It's called incentives. Every company in the industry at the moment is looking at how they can reduce budgets. Where are the cuts? Where are the savings? How do you defend that incentive budget to your CFO? What are the key things, the key metrics that you're using to say, hey, this is a budget we need and we need to maintain?
Yeah, partner metrics are like my running joke. That is the hill or mountain I will die on in my career, because I think it's super important. So I think it goes back to understanding metrics and having things that are measurable. And one of the things I will say that I love about my new role and my new company is they have a lot of data, and they're very savvy in terms of how we measure and how we track. And so I think the first piece of it is getting alignment on what you're going to measure, and getting agreement, right? So whether it's your CFO with your bucket of money, whether it's even some of your marketing programs that you're doing and how you're aligning to sales, I think that clarity on what you're measuring and how you're going to show the impact is really important, because I think a lot of times partner people speak a different language. And what happens is you go in and you are like, oh, look, like I've done this and this and this. And they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, that makes no sense to me. And so I think that upfront alignment on what you're going to measure becomes really, really important. And then depending on the incentive, right? So there's different ways to track. Like if you're looking at, let's say MDF is one of your incentives, right? You're probably trying to associate that with deal reg. You're looking at pipeline. You want to show that the partner's overall business is growing, right? So in my last role, I used to say, you know, you have to look holistically. If you're putting a funded head and you're putting MDF, and then they're taking advantage of deal reg and some, you know, back end rebates, let's say, you should be looking at that partner holistically. And if that partner's not growing with you, you should be taking all of that to them and sitting down and saying, we're investing all of this and this is what we're executing with you, but we're not seeing you bringing us any new business from a deal reg standpoint, or your overall business isn't growing. So I think CFOs in particular, right, are looking for a return on their investment. They're looking that the partners are growing and adding value. And that value for a lot of companies is that they are bringing net new logos to you and they're bringing new business, right? If they don't want to incent business that they can get with their field sales team, they want it to be net new. In most companies and really from a best practice standpoint, that's usually measured by something with deal reg. When you get into the alliances, that gets different with co-sell and some of the influence stuff, but kind of pure channel, that's what you're looking at. So I would say you want to be very clear with your CFO and align on what those metrics are and how you're going to measure. And then really you want to be able to show incremental growth, because that's what they care about. And so if they're going to spend this money and give it out to partners, so to speak, right, they want to show that we're getting something in return, right? So one of the things we track with our deal reg is new logos that are coming in as part of, you know, what we're incenting them to do.
Okay. Colin, if I can bring you in, give some examples of the key metrics that your customers are asking for to justify the incentives that they're providing for their partners.
I think Trisha made a good point. I think, you know, obviously I think it's the easiest to look at year over year growth and revenue and marketing opportunity, right? When you're, you know, looking to kind of partner with partners. But I really think you also have to look at, you know, the long, whether or not they're invested with you, right? In the long haul. And are there other areas, you know, and metrics to measure that are helping you, you know, branch into new markets and things like that. So some metrics that just come to mind. We talked about the revenue target, that's pretty easy, but maybe there are enablement initiatives, right? Like maybe you're looking at broadening the number of certifications or specializations within, you know, the internal sales team, right? Maybe you're conducting a number of trainings and demos and site surveys. So these kind of, I think, plug and play depending on, you know, that 6 to 12 month incentive plan that we were talking about a little bit ago, right? at various milestones, the metrics change and they evolve, and it depends, I think, on what you're trying to achieve and when during that 6 month, to 12-month plan. And then outcomes, I think, are the most important part. It's not just about measuring and selecting the metrics, but are there things like Tricia was talking about? Are you looking at the number of net new partners or customers? Are you looking at the number of partners you've developed along the way, or sales engineers you've developed along the way? Are you looking to increase the number of partners or customers? Are you looking for operational achievement or business transformation? So there's a lot of different things I think that you can look at. And I think it just depends on, again, what are the goals and the objectives of your organization, and how closely those align with your partners. And then when you're looking at that specific outcome-based incentive or strategic incentive, what are the goals that you're trying to attain from that?
If I could just add to that, Carlin, I think exactly what Carlin's saying, and the way to do that is to think about not just the outcome, not just the sale or the revenue, but how are you helping your partners change their behavior over the long term? So I know a lot of times we're like, I measure my ROI by month or by quarter, but if we could think somewhat more long-term and help those partners, especially the ones that are growing, that maybe don't have the revenue milestones you want them to have yet, but have a ton of potential. If you can incent using points-based incentives, the activities that are going to get them to the right place, then they'll keep doing those activities. They'll see that the fruits of their labor are actually paying off, not just because they're getting an incentive, but because they're making more connections, they're getting more prospects, they're having better conversations, they're getting people who are more interested than getting hung up on. So we're a huge fan of the points-based incentives that incent sort of throughout the whole process so that partners just get better at marketing and selling your solutions.
And I think, Heather, you made the good point earlier, like also putting partners in the driver's seat of how they want to leverage those points, right? Like, so
yeah,
before it was this connection with the mountain bike, or maybe you're saving points to go on a trip to Tahiti or something like that, or maybe you are opting in for the reloadable gift card, right, as an option. But then we're also seeing, some clients throw out other types of incentives, right, or options to redeem those points. Like maybe they are for certifications or specializations, right? So just, letting the partner be in the driver's seat because you're not sure where they're at that point in time. And I think just, again, variety, I've said this is a spice of life. So having more opportunities for partners to get paid and earn that incentive, I think is great as well.
No, and I think you hit on an important rub, getting paid, right? And as we know what situation we are in with the economy today, right? And I think that's, partners they obviously taking you on, and this is all right. No one's in this. There's no, not too many nonprofits here, right? You're managing channel businesses and so on and so forth. And so at the end of the day, it's aligning to that. And if you have brought on new partners and maybe you're running new programs with them, that might not be full, and you're just going out the door, like you guys have mentioned, right? Just going out the door and launching them. It might not be all organized in the back end system with your finance team, right? Having that account stored with a PO lined up to it, or an MDF program attached to it to say, yes, they'll get paid on X, Y, and Z time. It might not be baked in yet so far. And so being able to make those payments, irregardless of if it's your top, your top 20 or somewhere on the long tail, being able to pay them on time accurately is important. And I think that's at least what we're seeing from a lot of our clients, especially when you get into the distributor realm. I mean, they're making, their margins are razor thin, right? And they're saying, well, you're paying me out every quarter, but I can show you that I've achieved what I achieved within the same week, right? Can we turn this from quarterly to monthly so you can validate and then pay me? Can we go to daily? And if we can move to that, it's almost seamless, right? And that's what we're all trying to drive towards, to have the better experience to drive the ROI with our programs. So,
Tricia, a lot of questions coming in about front end versus back end, and the advantages and disadvantages of both. What are your views?
So I think it depends, which is not a great answer, I know, but there's a lot that ties into front end and back end. Some of it ties to the appetite of the company. So back end tends to align to a bigger contra bucket. There's a lot of organizations, particularly with the world we're living in right now. They don't like to see that big line item. It makes them uncomfortable. And honestly, if you go out
Dig
to
into that, why does it make them uncomfortable? What are the issues there? So the people on
well,
the
I
call
think,
understand.
yeah, I think so. I think what happens is you see this, your CFO or your sales leader, probably both, see this big bucket of money. And they're like, ooh, and it goes back to the metrics, right? Like, what is all that money being spent on? And could we save money if we don't spend all that? Or could we move that money? And so I think anytime you have a big line item, MDF falls in that bucket, depending on your organization. I've worked in companies where you had really big MDF buckets, and it's the same thing. One of the roles I was in, we would do quarterly QBRs. We were doing all this stuff around MDF. Then I was on a call and somebody, like one of our leaders, said, well, nobody has any idea what's going on with that money or what we get for that. I'm like, I think my head just exploded and popped off, but okay, let's see if we can educate a little better. So some of it ties to education, but some of it is anytime you have a big bucket of money sitting somewhere that people don't understand. And in most organizations, I would say you have a set of people that understand the partner piece, but not everybody is educated in that. The people that got into those roles, there's a lot of ways to be a CMO and a chief revenue officer, and those bigger roles, they didn't always come through the partner ranks, right? So a lot of times they don't have that perspective. And so when they see big buckets of money, they think that's an easy target to cut. So I would say having definitive alignment around how you're spending those dollars and what you're measuring is important. When you move into the back end versus front end, what I've seen on the front end piece, and I would say if you go out and talk to partners, if you talk to 10 partners, you will get a different answer for every single one of them on whether they prefer front end or back end. They probably would tell you it depends on the vendor, the solution, like all sorts of things, right? So it's really hard to navigate that. That's where that having conversations with your partners, I don't remember who said, I think it was Chris that said, or maybe Carlin, around your prioritized partners, right? If that's who your 80% of your revenue is coming from, then their voices should be louder in that. The front end piece, if you have a lot of channel conflict with your field sales team, you're going to have a hard time on the front end rebate because you're going to have conflict. And if your direct sales team can undercut you and do crazy stuff, then that doesn't tend to work as well. If you are either comp neutral, 100%, channel in a particular segment, or however your organization structures that, oftentimes then that front end rebate actually works better for your partners because they're not competing with your sales team. So it's very nuanced in terms of how you look at front end versus back end. And pretty much everywhere I've worked, there is, like all those companies I've worked at, there's a debate to and fro of like which works and which doesn't. And so my answer really is it depends. And that's where you have to do the due diligence. And that's where if you're working with like the folks on this call as one of your vendors, they actually understand a lot of that pretty well, and they can help you navigate those conversations. And they have examples of what they've done and where it's worked. And maybe, if your ecosystem looks like somebody else's, maybe where it wasn't as effective. So I think being a student of the industry and seeking out expertise, right? And looking at what's happening from an industry perspective is also really important because again, these partners are changing. And so to keep up with all of that, what might have worked 6 months ago, we're in a different place. It may not even work now, right? And so you have to be a student of the business and actually understand the industry. And again, my friends on the call here are really good folks to do that because they see a lot and they execute on all this stuff, which is hard.
I think it also, I would say both, right? Like, are you filling the funnel or are you trying to help the salesperson close something? You want to do both. You want to make sure you're filling the funnel while the sales team is closing something. So that means you need both types of incentives.
That's true. Both is always better.
Carlin, coming to you. A lot of questions coming in about incentivize the individual or incentivize the company. What I know there's pros and cons of both. If you could just talk to us a little bit about what those pros and cons are, Carlin.
I think it's interesting, and I think we're seeing a shift. So I think, we've always managed programs that for clients that have or are running both, right? And in some respects, some clients are just, I don't know if they're late to the game or they're just recognizing that incenting the individual is now top of mind or important and critical, just as incenting the partner is. So I think some pros for incenting the organization is obviously some of the questions I saw were how do you guardrail or put swim lanes around the sales claiming process, right? And whether or not the right individual is getting tagged to that sale, right? So I think there's some complexity in that, right? And if there's a solution in place to manage that, I think you're okay there. But if you don't have one in place, that does add some complexity to it. I think, the other benefits is, I think as we're getting into looking at influencers and things like that, those tend to be a little bit further down, right? As those normal folks that would be running things at the partner organization. In some cases, those people are different. And so I think you need to identify who those people are, and they're critical to moving things across and through the pipeline. And so I think, having point-based incentives or individual types of incentives are critical in this day and age, because, that sales engineer or whoever that is, is identified as the influencer, might be working with, multiple, vendors at once. And so in some cases, it's a 50-50. I think Heather talked about this earlier. Like if you're offering the better incentive, they might, suggest your product or solution over the other just because of the incentive that's being offered to them specifically. So just some things there. I'm sure some people can add some more color to that, but that's, top of mind as far as pros and cons.
Heather, what changes are you seeing? Are you seeing a general shift towards the individual or towards the company? What are you seeing at 360?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the partner themselves. To Carlin's point, I think it's really important to incentivize the seller, but sometimes the owner of the business wants those funds to go to them so that they can incentivize, so that it's not coming from vendor XYZ, it's coming from the business owner and their boss who's saying, you're doing a great job, here's an incentive. I do agree that in tougher economic times, they both need it. So the business owner probably needs more MDF. The individual salesperson probably needs more points-based or cash, and they feed each other. So if you have a catalog of MDF options and the seller comes in and says, I'm going to run a golf event, but you as the vendor know that that's not going to get them as much net new or fill the pipeline as much as like a seminar or some sort of other event, webinar, then having the seller incentivized to leverage the MDF correctly is going to boost both sides of the business. So again, my answer is both.
Okay. And Chris, bringing you into this, I've got a comment here. We're hearing more partners are restricting spiffs to their reps for anti-bribery reasons. Are you getting that from your customers? How big an issue is compliance today?
Yeah, no, compliance is a kind of omnipresent, I guess, character, if you will, in the whole channel space. And, and then it becomes, well, who's enforcing it? And you have to ask yourself that question. But I think we all want to be on the straight and narrow, right? And I think, yeah, you need to pay attention to it if you're running a program and it does, go steps over the line, right? This can have some serious impacts for your career, you as an individual, but then also can set back your whole department and credibility across the organization. And then can also lead to, we all try and stay in a good light in the public sphere. and settlement cases and trying to not go into court and have some of this stuff be brought up is all important. So yeah, compliance vastly important. And I think when it gets to spiffs, I'm not actually particularly an A student on the spiff category, but what I do know is that you do want to have a certain level of individual incentives and company level incentives. And it all goes back to what I think everyone here on the call is talking about. Depends on what the business, the business and the way that business model is developed, right? If you're working with a distributor and they have all these sales engineers going around and quoting design regs, that's because the distributor itself gets increased margin because of the price concession that happens for every one of those designs that's registered on a deal, and it makes more business decisions. And so then they organize the department and the staff to go out and register versus, and it's not that you can't set it up where there's loyalty points that sales engineers at the distributor gets loyalty points for every design that it's just that the company hasn't organized that. So there'd be some change management required there, I think, as well. And then if you think about like any component manufacturer, they're going to have these manufacturing reps that aren't necessarily, they're kind of like they're running their own business, making deals happen with contract manufacturers and OEMs. They're going to get paid a commission, but that doesn't mean that they can't get something on top of that. So you could have multiple individual incentives. You could have a commission, you could have individual incentives, and then you could also additionally have a company overhaul policy for points that gets you something else. And so I think these things can stack. And when you do stack them, I think to Heather's point, right, it can drive more towards the value and the outcome you're trying to achieve. So I don't know if that necessarily answered your spiff question, but hopefully it helps in terms of the context.
I would
So,
just
Rob,
jump in and say that automation has been updated over the years, and that's sort of like gaming the system to submit a design so that you get that's been mitigated on a lot of platforms.
And the other thing I would say is compliance is becoming a bigger topic in, at least in like, the vendor world, in the sense of, or the manufacturer world. The law, a lot of the laws have changed. And so even in the last few years, what you're allowed to pay, what you're allowed to incent, particularly if you work with public sector, there's a lot of scrutiny around that. And so one, being friends with your compliance people is important in your organization if you're developing a spiff, and the folks on this phone probably understand that quite well in terms of how you build stuff. But some of it is the tolerance of your organization, some of it's some of the stuff that they've seen. But even in my last role, like compliance was becoming more of a topic, very focused around what we were doing with public sector. So like spiffs for public sector reps out, not allowed to do that. And I was trying to figure out if like it was just targeted, like, is this something that it's just our organization? And I reached out to some of my peers at other organizations, and they were like, no, like we're being held to cost per head. We're not allowed to do a lot of the bigger, flashier events because it's too much of a cost per person. Public sector, I think you're allowed to give them a pencil and a glass of water, and that is all they are allowed to accept. Like it's pretty definitive. And so I would say that partners are in that boat, right? Because like we had to get to a place with where our MDF, like when you logged in, you had to accept terms that if you submitted a claim that had public sector on it and it was over the threshold, we were going to reject it. Like we had to get really, really kind of crazy with our partners, because I can't sit and figure out if this person is from like a state and local business or whatever's happening. So I would say everybody needs to have an eye towards compliance, because that is becoming a bigger topic, probably in everybody's organization.
And I think that's a great point, Tricia, because even as third parties that help facilitate like your channel incentive programs, I think we're getting more scrutiny to be a partner in that space as well. Like I know that we've won business because the predecessor or whoever it was from that program was part of a holistic audit. And maybe they weren't really the person that facilitated the financial issue, right? But because they were supporting it and offered the system and the back end, services, they were kind of, scarlet lettered, right? So I think it's really important for us to be partners in space. And if you're working with someone, like one of us on the call, we're going to ask, some of those questions early on. Ultimately, it's your finance and your treasury team and your compliance team advising us, but we're going to raise our hand and say, whoa, are you sure you should be doing that? Because again, we don't want to be, the scarlet letter, right? So.
Excellent. And we promised people that we get real specific on incentives. So Heather, if you look at the clients that you're dealing with at the moment, you look at what was happening 12 months ago, you look at what was happening today, which incentives and what types of incentives are more popular now, are more in demand now from the partner perspective and your client perspective? And let's try and get real specific on this.
Yeah, so I would say, we work with a lot of hardware companies. We work with a lot of outside of tech, like our biggest customers at the beginning of the company were in kitchen and bath and HVAC. So there was no inventory and everybody went and got whatever they could get. I remember my refrigerator died and we got one that didn't allow the dishwasher to open. You had to open the refrigerator door and then open the dishwasher. But we needed something desperately. And it was, the midst of inventory crunch. Now all that inventory's come back, but people aren't buying as much because we're also in a recession and inflation. So people are stopping spending a little bit. So things like cashback incentives or promotional incentives or spiffs that tie to the customer rebate are super popular for those types of companies. And in the software arena, we're seeing people just slowing their roll and spending a little bit. So volume incentives and spiffs are huge right now. Enabling the salesperson to make a decision based on the money that they're going to get from it and still selling their customer the right thing. They're not selling someone the wrong thing, but that's secondary where it's usually the primary driver. We're seeing that the primary driver is what are the salespeople and business owners going to make more money on right now.
And Chris, what specific incentives are you seeing that are working with your customers at Model N? What are the changes? What's working now?
Yeah, sure. I think in general, more incentives are being rolled out right at this moment. And then the last quarter, and really, it's really to try to pull forward that demand, specifically in hardware, right? Similar as the consumer electronic side. A lot of this is overspent during COVID to meet some other demands, and then now it's slumped. Right. And so how can we bring forward demand by employing some rebates? And a lot of it's rebates associated, and a lot of it's on the back end side. So, and they're not just, there's the ones that are always, on the top line revenue coming through on all inventory sold, but they're trying to be a little bit more complex. So now it's more, can you drive this incremental volume within this segment or within this region? And so dialing a little bit more specificity to drive intended actions by region and by channel, and also trying to do that in a way that can pull forward demand and just reduce some channel conflict as well. So that's what we're seeing. And honestly, I think in terms of the co-sell co-op and MDF, those have kind of pulled back a little bit, but hopefully that helps.
Okay. And Colin, what are you seeing from your customers?
I mean, I would echo the same sentiments.
What are the changes specifically? What's happening? What are the changes?
Yeah, I would say echo same sentiments as Heather and Chris. I would just say back to what we were talking about earlier is that individual incentive. I mean, it's definitely becoming top of mind with a lot of clients. In some cases, they historically have only run SDF or MDF, but now they're interested in, parallel running, some sort of individual incentives, whether those are spiffs or, true kind of reward type programs, right? Where you are earning points based on opting into promotions. And linking yourselves to specific sales or other things, right, that have helped guided things through the pipeline. So I definitely think that's what at least we're being asked about, and what, all the demos that are coming in and things like that.
Excellent. And Tricia, you just moved into Equinix. Partner comes to you, they want help with marketing. They've got this wonderful event idea. Good idea, bad idea? Are you going to fund it? What else would you like to fund? What would you like them to do marketing wise, and how are you going to get them to do that?
Yeah, so it's funny, I just read something that was saying, hey, partners are like interested in events, and that's like ramping up. So I think events get a little bit of a bad rap, but it's because a lot of I'll say not even partners, a lot of, even field marketers, right? Like they want their whole strategy to be events. Events definitely have a place, right? And I think that people are a little starved for that human connection. So you are seeing events ramp up. But for me, it's about how you're building the integrated plan. And there's so much opportunity with digital that you are, if all you're focused on is doing events, then you're sort of wasting your money, right? Because it's a very expensive way to acquire your customers. And so, we try to work off of a guideline of, keeping events to kind of a small percentage, but, it's really tied to understanding how you're building your plan, making sure that it's an integrated plan. Our plans consist usually of some kind of digital motion. We have a bit of an ABM motion in terms of working with partners and the prospects that we're targeting. And then there is a place for events. So you have to really build that integrated plan. I have all sorts of salespeople come to me and say, like, we're not doing enough events. We have to do all these events. I'm like, well, let's back up and let's talk about what we are doing and how we're actually hitting that return better than if we were to just invest all of the money. Now, occasionally you do have some areas like public sector that tend to be a little more event heavy. And so again, you just have to understand that in terms of how you're building your plan. But most, not all, but a lot of MDF has gone to proposal based. And I think the goodness in that is that you can work with your partners. There's a lot of effort, I would say, the vendors are putting on educating partners around marketing, and you can help your partner build the spirit of proposal based is that fewer partners are coming to you with bigger plans, and you can help them be more integrated in how you're building that. Partners that come with their one-off event, I call those random acts of marketing, and they don't drive return. So people don't like that when I say that, but it is true. Like they don't drive the return, right? And it's a very expensive way. I had in my last role, I was at an event and I sat down with a partner who was one of our top partners. And they were like, all we do are events, and that's how we go to market. And you just need to know that. And that's how we fund them, blah, 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 with MDF or whatever. And I was like, it's a really expensive way to go to market, which they didn't like my answer on that, but it is true, right? The research shows that, and your return will show that when you start measuring that. So I would just say you need to have an integrated plan. There's definitely a place for your event, but it can't just be a one-off.
Excellent. And Carlin, if you look at the whole mix, what percentage of revenues are your customers typically spending on incentives? Have you got an insight into that?
Gosh, I mean, it's variable, anywhere from, I would say 3 to 10%. I mean, on average. I mean, again, I think it's hard, to say that, because if I look at every single client, there is a variable percentage across all those clients.
Yeah, I would say.
Final question for everyone. Go on, Chris.
Oh, I was just gonna agree with Carlin. It's by company, and then it's by segment. And yes, there could be some averages that might be similar across industries, but it's really company to company. And some companies, that's their style. It's like, hey, in order to make a buck, we got to give 50 cents away, and just because of depends on the product life cycle, depends on the market maturity, it depends on so many things. So just agree with that.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to start with Heather. Heather, looking at the incentives plan that you've got today, the market you've got today, what will be your one piece of advice for anyone on the call that's running an incentives program at the moment?
I think it's figure out how to collaborate. So a lot of times when we're talking about MDF, we're talking to the VP of channel marketing. And when we're talking about spiffs, we're talking to the VP of channel sales. And sometimes those two ships prefer not to meet. So a lot of times you want your MDF to be following the spiff program so that the spiffs are incenting the activities that leverage MDF correctly. It enables your teams to work more collaboratively. It enables the partners teams to work more collaboratively. So it's really important that you're on the same page there.
Excellent. And Colin, same question. One piece of advice.
I would say seek feedback to help continue to optimize what you're offering your partner base, right? And I think there was a comment here on how do you survey, how do you reach out? I think, partner advisory boards are great ways of getting that, one-on-one feedback and really organic kind of, feedback. I think, larger kind of surveys are also opportunities. And I think too, like if you're partnering with someone like us, like a third party, share that feedback with us, because that is extremely helpful when we're working with you on making recommendations to optimize and improve your programs. But if we don't hear that firsthand, it's very difficult for us to help you and continue to help you.
Excellent. And Chris, one piece of advice from you.
Yeah, no, and I'm just gonna, it's kind of keep it simple. Come back to the basics, and a lot of this stuff, it's a maturity thing, and there are some learnings along the way, and that's why we're all joining the channel focus events here, so we can bake those learnings into our next program. But I would say, don't overcomplicate things, right? If it's a very simple program, you're just trying to drive, just a certain revenue percentage, inventory percentage, or just drive to a certain activity within the sales organization, it's a fairly, simple activity. So the rebate or a spiff or incentive, whatever the incentive type is, should be fairly not that complex. But if you're now trying to layer in, I want to sell this specific product set within this channel region, and only this only applies to this certain subset of my target list or partners, and it's that specific and nuanced and complex, the program should be also that complex. And so just like for like, and just don't overcomplicate things.
Richard, final word, piece of advice from you. You've done this many times. It's the one thing that everyone should be really focused on.
So one of the things I would say, so we talked a lot about like partner view, partner feedback, that piece, the internal alignment, super important. So picking up on what Heather said, having partner marketing, partner sales, partner program, legal, compliance, your Salesforce team, like all the people that are going to be involved in this process, right? You need to drive alignment. So don't do something in a silo, like bring all those people along with you and have a lot of communication. Because when you go back to work with these folks, they're going to want to make sure that you've driven that internal alignment so that your Salesforce.com team is with you and that, your partner programs and partner marketing are aligned. So that internal alignment may be the thing that makes or breaks you.
Fabulous. Great insights, great suggestions, and a lot of help for people on the call. So to Trisha, to Carlin, to Heather and Chris, thank you very, very much indeed. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Rod.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, guys.